busy doing this one-man thing. These days the economy is so bad that people won't hire a five-piece group like I used to play with in the old days with Ralph Walker and the boys.
The first time I heard you was with Ralph Walker, who was a very famous jazz musician in the St. John's area. He played everything. But I'll tell you something I'd like to do is talk about jazz. I mean, that is almost as recent as the vibraphone.
Yeah. Of course, it started back in New Orleans in the...
Roughly what, late 1800s?
Yeah, in the houses of ill repute, if I could put it that way. Oh, yes. The red light district of New Orleans was where the musicians would be hired to play for the customers.
Does it have a black history?
Oh, yeah.
Jazz,
predominantly jazz. Jazz is predominantly black in the early days. I guess the influences came, the slaves, of course, and the European influences, the jigs and the reels and the polkas and the European music that came over, all sort of blended together, and the American Negroes took influences from all these different types of music and
kind of
blended it all together. You would get the marching bands at the funerals, which was just like the old military bands, you know, and you would get the fiddle players playing kind of folk music, jigs and reels and things like this, and it all gradually blended. And
how many different kinds of music go into this? I've heard jazz takes in things like bebop, swing, funk, a little bit of everything.
Oh yeah, you started way off in the early days with what they call traditional jazz or Dixieland jazz. The famous, well, I guess Benny Goodman was probably one of the famous ones, although he was white, but he kind of stole it from the earlier musicians. It's where you had the clarinet player and the trumpet player and the trombone player and a banjo usually in the rhythm section. And would you believe in those days the drummer was not considered to be a musician, and they used to hide him behind a curtain on the stage so that people wouldn't see him?
You're full of all kinds of interesting stories, but on the subject of jazz, I think one of the best descriptions I ever heard, they referred to jazz as the mother of all hybrids. Does that pretty much say it all?
Yeah, yes, because when the New World was being populated, all these people were bringing their own culture with them. And the whole thing started to blend together. And then, of course, when jazz began to move north into Chicago, I think was the next big thing. And the people in Chicago kind of put their own thing onto it. And then it moved to New York. And the people in New York started to make their changes to it. And
but there are so many different kinds. I've heard a lot of people say, no, I like this kind of jazz. You know, I'm not me, I'm talking for other people. This is easy listening, kind of laid back kind of jazz. And then every once in a while they say, but I don't like all this improvisational stuff. It gets kind of wild. How do you blend the two? Or do they serve really two different kinds of audiences?
Well, talking about jazz is like talking about classical music. It's such a wide range because as the musicians became educated, started to learn to read music, got into composing and arranging, then you started getting people like Duke Ellington, Count Basie with the big bands,
and my favorite of all time, Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong, of course, you had arrangers like Stan Kenton was one of the big innovative bands, and he had people like Pete Rugolo who did special arrangements just for the big band. So by now the musicians were reading music, they were getting very knowledgeable, very well educated, and this of course put a whole new slant. And then of course along came Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie with the bebop movement, which was considered by some at the time to be pretty way out, you know.
I was in New York, I was in my early 20s, and I heard that George Shearing was going to be at Birdland. Now to me, Birdland was jazz, certainly back during that particular period. And I will never forget the impression on the audience. It was dead silence when he walked into the room. And of course, after he played, I mean, the whole place went up. He's probably one of my all-time favorite jazz pianists. Although, did he play any other instruments?
He plays the accordion, would you believe?
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Now, you've met him. He has been here in St. John's.
Yes, he's been in St. John's. I met him. My wife and I met him.
Yes.
And and the other thing about George Shearing was he made the vibraphone popular because that particular sound that the George Shearing quintet had was the piano, the guitar, and the vibraphone playing in unison.
Yeah, which was a very unique sound,
yes,
wasn't
a very
it?
unique sound. The vibraphone would be played without the vibrato so that it gave a very dead, even sound, which blended with the electric guitar, and Shearing would play these big block chords on the piano, and it created a very, very unique sound that was instantly identifiable. So he made the vibraphone very popular and gave a lot of young vibraphone players a chance to play. Gary Burton is a name that comes to mind when he was about 20, 21 years of age. Played with George Shearing and then went on to play with Stan Getz and became a big name in his own right, playing with Chick Corea and all these more kind of way out musicians.
Right.
But Gary Burton as a young man was playing with George Shearing.
Jim, we've talked about, we've dropped a lot of jazz names, but if there was one in particular that influenced you more than any others, who would it be?
That would have to be Milt Jackson, I think.
Why? What did he play?
He plays the vibraphone.
He does?
Yeah.
Obviously.
Stan Getz was a very big influence because he was one of the first jazz musicians I ever heard playing tenor saxophone. But when I got into the vibraphone and I started listening to the modern jazz quartet with Milt Jackson on vibraphone, that was just love, totally. The man is just such an incredible vibraphone player.
Yeah. I could talk jazz all night long, but I know people are waiting to hear another song. What else do you have set for us?
Oh, I think we were going to do a little thing on Night and Day, if I remember.
Okay.
If I can find it on my
okay.
accompaniment.
Find it on your special
robot.
computerized music.
Yes, my robot accompanist.
I might just say that for anybody that joined us a little bit late, my very special guest is Jim Thomson, one of St. John's best-known musicians. He does play the vibraphone, and that's what everybody associates with, but he does occasionally play the tenor sax. Is our music ready?
Yes.
Maestro?
Yes.
Take it away.
Night and Day.
Gorgeous. Absolutely. You know something? You're in another world when you're playing, aren't you?
Yes.
You're not really here.
I've often said that what I lack in talent, I make up for in enthusiasm. I do get kind of carried away when I'm playing.
Oh, I think you're being extremely modest.
Well,
but
with jazz, you have to concentrate so much on what you're doing. You know, you're hearing the rhythm. You're thinking what your next phrase is going to be, what chord you're on. That it has to be total concentration. you know.
Jim, we're talking about the vibraphone. Very often, you know, major musicians or pianists as far as jazz is concerned. But somehow or another, most people connect either woodwinds or brass with jazz. Why?
I guess they were the first instruments, probably. I mean, the clarinet was one of the first instruments in the early traditional Dixieland jazz.
Yes.
And trumpets, Louis Armstrong,
Cornets.
of course, cornets.
Yeah.
You know, Red Nichols and his 5 pennies,
Yes.
you know, playing cornet.
Yeah.
Louis Armstrong with his trumpet, which was probably given to him by the orphanage, you know. And then, of course, the saxophone came along in slightly later years.
Yeah, slightly more mellow sound.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's something I had to ask you about, because I know you've had some really funny stories of people coming up to you at outside gigs, as they say. And, well, what kind of things do they say about you and the instrument?
One person saw me putting on my automatic backing and asked me, was the vibraphone playing itself? Now I'm standing there beating the devil out of this thing like this, and this person says, is this thing playing itself?
So they don't
No,
really
not,
understand an awful lot about it.
No, not really.
Believe it or not, a half an hour goes very, very quickly, but something I did want to ask you. I know you play a lot of gigs around town. Most recently, there's a jazz club that's opened in St. John's called the Pastoria.
Yeah, the Pastoria, yeah.
Here we are at the end of March. Do you have any particular gigs that people would like to catch you in the live, as they say?
In the live. I've got a couple of things coming up in the Newfoundland Hotel, but they're private things.
Mostly private parties.
Yeah. I have been down in the Pastoria a couple of times. They have a house band, incidentally,
Yes.
with young musicians who are very, very good
Yes.
musicians, excellent musicians. And sometimes when they want a little bit of a break, they'll call me to come in and fill in for a weekend sort of thing, put a group together and go in. So I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah.
I don't have a definite date from them. Unfortunately, I had to turn them down the last time they asked me because I already had a gig.
Something else going on. Well, you always seem to be here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah,
and
I get around.
A variety as well.
Yeah.
But we are, again, with about a minute left, so I'll give you an idea of how much time we've got. Jazz is changing to some extent, isn't it? People like Winston Marsalis.
Winston Marsalis is quite the way out musician. He recently did a big composition, a sort of jazz suite. It was almost a semi-classical thing. A lot of the younger rock musicians are getting into this jazz fusion thing, using bass guitars, synthesizers.
How do you feel about it? You don't look very happy.
Yeah, I like the sound of the acoustic instruments. I play around with synthesizers and all this stuff too,
Yes.
and it's fun. But when it comes down to actually expressing yourself on the music, the acoustic instrument somehow, to me, has it.
Yeah,
over
well,
your
you're very
electronic,
articulate when it comes to your music, when it comes to jazz, but you're most articulate when you're playing. So what are you going to take us out on?
A little thing called It's Only a Paper Moon.
I love it.
Yeah?
Jim, thank you so much.
Okay, let me find it on my robot here.
Okay. And of course, just a reminder that my very special guest on the program today has been Jim Thomson. He's going to end off with Paper Moon, another one of my favorites, and I know it's one of Jim's. Go, go, go.